Well, earlier on this morning, I spoke to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and that was in Westminster, and he told me quite a number of things, but one of them was about his big reform plan for the NHS. You can get the entire interview on our YouTube channel and indeed at talk.tv. We played the whole thing out at 10 o'clock if you want to toggle back and watch it at some stage. But the main thing he talked about was NHS reform. This is just a little bit of what he said.
In the first 3 months of the Labour government, we've ended the junior doctor strikes, which means we go into this winter for the first time in years now without having to contend with strikes as well as winter. We've put in just under £100 million to employ 1,000 more GPs onto the front line to help there. We've introduced a ban on ads, junk food ads targeted at children.
Well, that was Wes Streeting there, the Health Secretary, speaking to me a little bit earlier on. He also talked to me about the Conservatives and this story that Robert Jenrick has said today. He said a couple of things, actually. He says that Keir Starmer should be blamed for any OAPs who die during the winter. Of course, the winter fuel allowance is a very controversial policy. I asked him about that, about Wes Streeting. I asked him if he'd come into politics to take money away from old people. He said he certainly hadn't. And also channel deaths. There was another death in the channel yesterday, and that is something that, on Friday, and that is something that I asked Wes Streeting, Robert Jenrick has been talking about in regard to Keir Starmer. This is what he said specifically on the matter of winter fuel allowance. Robert Jenrick has said that Keir Starmer should be held personally responsible for people who die of cold this winter. Is that fair?
I think it's about time that Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch, Rishi Sunak and the whole clown show that led the country to this point took responsibility for their actions and said sorry.
Andrew Rosindell is the Conservative MP for Romford. He's also a supporter of Robert Jenrick. Let me just ask you about that at the end. A clown show, is that a fair description of the 14 years of Conservative government from Wes Streeting?
I think they're getting desperate. They've had less than 4 months in office, and it's been a catastrophe, not only for the country, but for the image of the Labour Party. We've had an absolutely dreadful start to this new government. So for them to talk about 14 years of Conservative government, which of course a lot of mistakes were made, and that's why we lost, but for them to talk about that is a distraction from the failures of their own government. They're letting their own voters down, and they're letting the entire country down.
It's interesting, Rob in East Yorkshire has contacted us on the specific issue of NHS reform, which I want to ask you about as well. Wes Streeting's plan, says Rob, sounds sensible. However, their implementation would require a big increase in the efficiency and productivity of staff. They have no incentive to cooperate because they know their jobs and pensions are safe. However, they spend their time at work. Improvement will only come when some form of competition is introduced. I wonder what you make of this plan. We had, of course, Andrew Lansley reformed the NHS. That was very unpopular in many ways. Some people said it worked, some people said it didn't. What do you make of Labour's plan, Andrew?
So I don't think they have a real plan, actually. As always with Labour, it's about spending more money, but it's not about getting better productivity from the money they're spending on public services.
Well, they say they want fundamental reform, and that's part of this scheme.
Well, what is it? What is their fundamental reform?
Well, they've said they'll do 3 separate things. One of they want community care. They want people to wear smartwatches, for example, to look after what they're doing, to look after their health a bit more, to try to do more preventative health care. I mean, they do have some ideas.
I don't think that's much different to what the previous government was talking about.
Maybe it didn't work?
Well, maybe it didn't. But the reality is that whoever's in power politically, the problem is it's a structural problem. And the structural problem is this: you have a state-run monopoly. Now, that's never going to be the most efficient way to deliver health services in this country. So you do need to look at what's going on in other countries around the world, where there is healthcare on the point of use, which is free, but without the bureaucracy, the red tape, the over-management and the inefficiency that I'm afraid we suffer with the health service.
A lot of people talk about admin in all of this. We've had a message, I don't know if you just heard me read it out there, from someone on this. And duty of candour is part of UK public health law. It's a guiding principle for all of those who work in the NHS. And there, all the time I hear people saying cut the admin, but that's actually of no benefit to patients, is it?
It isn't just direct admin, it's the way the whole thing is managed. It's a state-run monopoly. Now, you know as well as I do that every state monopoly state-run monopoly we've ever had in the public sector has always been inefficient. It's always wasted huge sums of money, and it doesn't work. So you need to look at a different way of managing it. And Robert Jenrick, well, I think we're going to be talking about
we'll get to him, don't worry.
But he's saying, and he's right to say this, that the NHS, we cherish it, but it's not a religion. And the problem is, and particularly in the Labour Party, they won't do serious reform because the party is full of people that treat the NHS as a religion. I think
although Wes Streeting himself has said it is a service, not a shrine.
Yes, he has. And I really hope he succeeds. I honestly do, because I think a Labour government has a chance of real reform, but I just don't think he'll succeed because the Labour Party, being the party it is, will not let him do anything that radical.
Well,
so I don't have a lot of confidence, I'm afraid.
I think a lot of people, I think a point that I would probably add to that in agreeing with you is in regard to the junior doctors. I mean, he's given them 22% rises without any fundamental reform that needs to actually happen.
Giving out the money as usual, but without any real agreement about productivity or a better service. Yeah. Look, my job as an MP is to make sure that my constituents have the very best healthcare. I'm not ideological about this, and I do think that the ideology of the NHS being a state-run monopoly, that is yesterday. We need to move forward with a different system.
The vast majority of people who have rung me about this particular issue, I would say I said this a little bit earlier in the programme, the two dominant issues, politically anyway, from our viewers and listeners here at Talk are the freebies on winter fuel allowance. A lot of people are really, really annoyed at winter fuel allowance. Your man, the man you back to be next leader of the Conservative Party, Robert Jenrick, says blame Keir Starmer for winter OAP deaths. I had quite the contretemps actually with John McTernan, former Blair advisor. He said that he didn't think any old people would die as a result of this, as a result of this policy. I think he's wrong. But is it right to blame the Prime Minister specifically and personally in this way?
I think Keir Starmer is a disaster as Prime Minister. I think he's out of his depth. I think he doesn't seem to be really in control of what's going on. Policies are being made on the hoof, and this is one of those policies. We didn't hear about it in the Labour manifesto at the election, but Rachel Reeves now suddenly realises she needs to raise money to spend on things that Labour want to spend money on, and they're attacking our old age pensioners, the people actually who have served our country all their lives, taking money directly away from them. I think it's a shameful situation. Of course, people will suffer. There are going to be elderly people who will not be able to pay their fuel bills. And, you know, we know this. A lot of elderly people will turn off the heating to save money if they're on a fixed income. So inevitably, there are going to be people that will suffer. I sincerely hope no one dies because of it. But if there are deaths, well, it's the fault of the government that introduced the policy.
OK. Robert Jenrick has also said that Keir Starmer should be responsible for the deaths in the Channel because he hasn't taken enough action or concrete enough action on immigration. Laying that at his door is the same tactic, essentially.
But it's true. He's got rid of the Rwanda policy. Which
that was never going to work,
well,
was it?
Was it? Within these ECHR, no. We had a problem. That's why we have to leave the ECHR and be completely sovereign over our own laws. But of course it's going to work. You have to have a third country option, a deterrent, so that if people come to this country illegally, they are sent straight out to a third country.
Well, the Conservatives couldn't make it work. They called an election before we even got a chance.
I agree. That's why we lost, and I understand that. But what we should have done is to have reformed the Human Rights Act at the very least, got rid of the Human Rights Act, changed it to a British Bill of Rights, and Robert is proposing to do just that and to leave the ECHR so we can make our own decisions again. And then we could have done. We could have followed through on the Rwanda policy. We weren't able to do so because the ECHR got involved. So we're being overruled by a foreign court.
But you look at Germany, for example. Germany is making its own decisions. It's withdrawn or it's essentially not recognising Schengen at the moment, that passport-free travel for many people. They're within the ECHR and they're within the EU.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how some countries apply these things differently. But the problem
so why can't we?
Because Tony Blair brought in the Human Rights Act. And the Human Rights Act and the Supreme Court, of course, it all goes through the Human Rights Act to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will say we have to obey ECHR rulings because the Human Rights Act compels us to do so. So again, it is a failure of the last Conservative government. We should have repealed all this. We should have... we voted for Brexit. I know the ECHR has nothing to do with the EU, but it's the same principle. The British people elect a parliament, we make the laws, and the laws of this country should be sovereign.
Tell me about Robert Jenrick himself, because we've interviewed him many times on this programme. We've interviewed Kemi Badenoch as well on this station, certainly. What is it that convinces you about him?
Because he's genuine. And
really? Because a lot of people say he's changed his opinion quite a lot. Is that genuine?
No, he's genuine. He's an absolute conservative, and he realises, which I've said right from the start of this leadership election, is that it is about becoming the party of the right of centre again. So I was going around Romford, my constituency, wearing a blue rosette, proudly, as I always do. A lot of people voting for me, but they weren't voting for the party. They didn't know what the party stood for. We've lost our way. We gave up being conservative in so many areas. We forgot what being conservative is all about. What Robert is doing, and he has been right the way through the only candidate, from what I could see, that wants to take back the territory we've foolishly given away to reform. It's simple mathematics. If we don't win the right of centre back as a united vote against the Labour Party, Labour's going to keep winning. So what Robert is doing, and rightly so, and yes, he's a convert to a lot of things, and he didn't used to have some of these views, but you know,
do you worry about that?
No, Mrs Thatcher was a convert. I remember Mrs Thatcher, I was quite young at the time, as you can imagine, Common Market referendum in 75. She wore that wonderful jersey with all the flags
seeing it, yeah.
on,
not at the time.
Common Market. She became Prime Minister, and she realised that the European community, Common Market, European community, European Union as it became, she realised that it wasn't for us.
You're not worried that a number of people on the right of the Conservative Party backing him, getting him through to leader, and then he changes his mind again?
No, because the party's over if that happens. So it's a simple... We are now on a precipice. If we are foolish enough...
Do you trust them?
To go for some mushy, nondescript consensus, and I actually like Kemi a lot, but she spoke about consensus the other evening on that debate. Now, you know what Margaret Thatcher said about consensus? Consensus is avoiding the issues. What Robert has not done from the start of this campaign is avoid the issues. He's confronted every issue head on. I know what he believes in.
And you trust him not to change his mind again?
Absolutely, because I've spent a lot of time with him, and I believe he understands that the party is on the edge of being swallowed up by reform if we don't get that centre-right vote back.
OK. What do you make of Kemi Badenoch's comments today that it takes two parents to raise a child, and that we should be much harsher on parents who absolve themselves of their responsibilities and don't look after the children? Does it take two parents to raise a child?
Well, look, clearly it is the best family unit is a mother and a father who bring up their children and who love their children and bring them up and spend time with them and look after them, and they become good human beings because it's a good family background. That's always been the case. Of course, there are cases where there aren't two parents, and sometimes that's because of a sad situation, a divorce or a death or whatever it might be. I'm not judgmental about these things. I think you can be a very good parent as a single parent. I know a lot of those people, but I'm not quite sure what point Kemi is making. I believe 100% we should have a much stronger family policy. I think that we've failed to do this as a party. We need to be a pro-family party and encourage families to take responsibility for their own children. A lot of parents, I'm afraid, they don't. They send them to school and they let other people worry about the problems, and they're not as responsible. But responsible parenthood is absolutely fundamental to creating a better society and bringing up children in the right way.